Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Two Doors podcast. I am here with Jonathan. Jonathan is the founder and chief technical officer at Silverpond, an AI startup developing Highlighter, an enterprise perception system that empowers organizations to transform their operations utilizing and using AI. Jonathan and Silverpond helped set up the Machine Learning and AI Meetup group in Melbourne, which now has more than 10,000 members. Join us as we explore the evolution of machine learning over the past decade, upcoming innovations in AI, and how these innovations are transforming software systems within organizations. Jono, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alex, good to be here.
It's been a hot minute since we last caught up, and I've watched obviously your Highlighter product. It's just been evolving. So yeah, tell us what you've been up to. Tell us a bit about what's been going on.
Yeah, I think when we last connected, we were a consultancy working in machine learning and AI. And then we chose to make this transition to building the Highlighter product and being a product company. So that's been an interesting journey in and of itself, going from consultancy into product. We've been building this new technology, which we call an enterprise perception system. And that's where we're thinking organizations are going to go in terms of there's this transition where companies, instead of having people go out there and use their sensors and type their information into forms like a CRM, or like if you run like a back office warehouse, there's a form that people would have filled in traditionally. And then they're going to transition into relying on a machine to collect that data. So using something like sensor, a classic example might be sticking up a camera. And then once we have these sensors, typically they want to get a machine to process them because it will just be too much data. And so when you roll out these sensors in your organization and have machines start to process that data, you've begun to build what we call an enterprise perception system. That's kind of a very different way of running your business than previously, when you would have gone and had people go out, fill forms, on a laptop or a desktop or mobile phone. Yeah.
And that's fascinating to see that future, because I mean, you were doing AI before this was like a known thing, or machine learning. I mean, you're utilizing computer vision to catch poachers in an anti-poaching system. And like, you've actually helped humanity and gone underground of like actually broadcasting, going, look, we've saved this amount of animals or anything like that. And to now go into this perception idea, it's fascinating. So there's obviously a lot of technology behind it that goes into that to make it look seamlessly.
Yeah, so this is this evolution. We were there in the States when the first kind of deep learning papers were being released. Back when AlexNet was out, or the DeepMind seminal paper on the Atari, on playing games in Atari games. And so I think what we're seeing is this like increase in capability for AI systems. But there's also been a corresponding, drop in costs for sensors over this period of time. I think when you start to marry up a couple of these big trends, organizations are now starting to take advantage of these technologies and shift the way their organizations are run.
Yeah.
And I think what that naturally means is also a shift in the way people are going to conduct their work. So I think we're starting to see, in terms of the companies that we engage with, they're now starting to shift from having people do, let's just call it like the day-to-day kind of detail work, to working at the meta level. And I think anyone that's been working with ChatGPT starts to understand a little bit of what that looks like, right? You're now starting to think about, how do I work at the meta level in terms of the prompting and trying to define what I want, and just relying on the machine to carry out, to do the how.
Yeah. And we have to also test the machine, right? Like there's the whole idea that sometimes, like, I've forgotten the word, is it hallucinations?
Hallucinations.
Yeah, like that sort of stuff happens in some of these large language and model systems. But like, it's very interesting to see where it will go. Like, what's your predictions then in terms of the whole, we're in this revolution right now. So you're saying perception is like the future, and that's where a lot of the tech will go?
I guess how I'm trying to describe is this transition of the organization itself. not just like an individual's person's job at their desk. I mean, that we're seeing immediately, how many people who are using ChatGPT day to day for work is starting to change how they do their work, right? But I think what will shift is the enterprise itself will shift how they do things. So instead of being in the small, it's going to be enterprise wide. How the enterprise kind of runs, say whole processes will shift from like this kind of presumption that you'll have these humans going in and keying the data into, let's just say like a CRM, probably recruiters like yourself have a CRM. How do you manage all the people that you talk to and all the relationships that you have? I think in time, it's going to shift to being, instead of you keying it in or kind of done through your hands or even your account, it's going to be ingested from, let's just say, the internet or whatever other means you have for connecting and relating with people. I mean, some people might imagine a really far off scenario where it's like your glasses or something that's attached to your face, and that could be, what is the direct input for a CRM? I mean, that's one way to think about it, but probably even a simpler, nearer term thing is just like if you're on LinkedIn a lot, which I presume recruiters are, maybe the system just ingests data from LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And, adds it to your own local database, filters for candidates for you, right? So like how things come in, how your organization perceives what's happening is originating from the machine rather than originating from people. And I think that's going to be a fundamental shift.
Yeah.
Right. And that kind of fundamental shift is what we've been working on with Highlighter. And it's like, well, if that fundamental shift kind of requires a new way of thinking about how you build these software systems for the enterprise, you kind of start from a different base because you have a different underlying assumption.
That's fascinating. You're blowing my mind, John. It's so because you've worked in this space for a long, long time, and so you've actually helped a lot of the companies like along this journey. But the fact that you've got this product now is brilliant. So it's obviously going to keep succeeding, keep growing out, and in terms of like these machines, then like for people who are more grads and everything like that, what would you recommend to them, like who are like thinking AI, like I don't know where to start, there's so much information, like what would you recommend to people getting in the industry that are they're kind of interested in machine learning or they're interested in some of this?
I think if they want to work in this kind of transition, let's call it, because there'll be a bunch of companies that are shifting, right? And because they're shifting, they're going to need people to help them with the shift. We're not really at the point where you can just go order and fire, Elon Musk Android robots and go, hey, help me shift over my business to this new way of doing things. So we'll still need people with this shift. And I think to learn and understand how to make this shift, a couple of kind of areas where, they'll need expertise on one's like, how do you go about collecting the data? That's always going to be critical. I mean, you'll have companies collecting data with drones, or they'll roll out sensors of different kind, or maybe they'll just like build something to scrape the internet. I mean, there's just so many AI startup companies right now that effectively start with their source of data as something on the internet, right? Scrape the internet for something. Could be LinkedIn, could be something else. Maybe they try and scrape, I don't know, Twitter or something, or Discord or whatever. And they will try and ingest data and then start to make sense of it. So you can work on the data collection side that, various different use cases and industries have different requirements for how they want to collect data. So I presume if you work in mining, it's going to be different to working inside, a fruit processing facility, different from if you're working in banking. So how you go and collect that data is different. And if you want to work on the processing side, which is what we would traditionally call like the AI side, then you can also work and try and specialize in that particular side. And that goes all the way to, working on small models. Maybe your processing is designed to process at the edge because it's a remote site. Maybe it is like a mining site or an agriculture site. Has to be done on these kind of like small edge devices, and then require small models, or it could be big. It could be like hoping to try and, work on fine-tuning some of these LLMs that are made available. I think it's going to be, particularly, if we have Australian grads, I think it's unlikely that we would have an Australian homegrown LLM like Anthropic or Mistral or DeepSeek.
Be great to see though, wouldn't it?
It would be great to see. And if there are kind of, Australians with the resources, I would encourage them to invest into it. If only that it helps develop a capability locally. But I just haven't seen Australians express an interest in developing that industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had Dave from Main Code on here, and they've got huge backing, and they're trying to do some of that in the AI research space. So I'm loving hearing these conversations, different people and we have to collaborate as well, right?
Yes.
Australia, we want to put them on the map. Like we were talking just before this about hunger, and I think you have to be hungry. So I love that insight, John. So you're saying get a massive amount of data, build some processes, like work with the data and see what you can actually do with it so you can learn about these models.
I think as a grad, that's kind of where you can start, right? And if you're on the processing AI, you want to do the AI side, then just get started building stuff. And there's just so much open source stuff now.
Yeah.
And there's so much open data. So there's really no excuse to get familiar with the tools and just build things, interesting things with it, and get familiar with what these tools do. Lots of opportunity because this transition is just starting to happen, and I think that's why there's been so much investment going into it, because people across the industry are seeing this as a shift. And some people kind of call it maybe like the agentic systems as the shift that things are going to go to. And I guess from our perspective, we would kind of see these agentic systems as like these AIs that go and process the data that comes into an organization. Right. So it could be something as simple as candidate profiles coming in from some source. I don't know, maybe it's a website and then there's 1,000 people kind of uploading things in.
And so, Jono, as somebody who's worked in AI for quite a while, can you run us through the history of AI?
You were just mentioning before about Eliza in 1967, through Transformers in 2017. And it depends on what lens you want to take on AI, because I recall the first AI conference happened in the 1950s.
Wow.
And I think what they were trying to grapple with back then was how to use like logic, because they had designed the original programming languages back then. How they can use logic to make machines think. But I think one of the interesting lessons, because going back from then they had innovations later on, for example, like beating Gary Kasparov in chess, through to DeepMind beating the Go chess players, and you kind of see this incremental improvement of machines just getting better than humans at lots of different domains. But I think one of the important or interesting lessons that we've learned over this time, and they call it in the industry the bitter lesson. And what that is that as an engineer, sometimes you think that you can just write a more intelligent algorithm or more intelligent thing, like come up with a more clever solution. But the bitter lesson is that you can just throw more data and compute at it. Right. And the machine can work it out. And this has been kind of like this trend going back, decades of like, as computers have gotten more powerful and as we've gotten more data, we've just been able to make it do more things. And I think it's a very difficult trend to bet against. And I think that's then jump on that trend. And I think that's why organizations like OpenAI or XAI are investing so much money in both compute, building all these gigantic data centers and collecting all the data. So XAI purchased Tesla, which is a fleet of how many hundreds of thousands of vehicles collecting data from sensors, right? Or I think OpenAI has probably got a lot of partnership arrangements to try and feed into the training of their AI. So they're clearly betting on this, they call it like a scaling trend or scaling law, where as you throw more data, as you throw more compute, it just gets better. Yeah.
And is that the correct way to go about building these systems, do you feel?
I think with, part of this transition I've been talking about is having machines collect data and machines process the data. I think when you start to think and design your organization in that realm, then you have to work out how you collect volumes at the machine scale, which is much larger, right? If your like recruitment consultancy has, let's just say, a dozen people, how much data can a dozen people type into your computing systems? The moment you switch to a machine collected, like, well, I don't know, you could have thousands of machines going out there collecting data for you. Now you have to think about how you go about organizing that information so that you can then process it, get some use out of it.
Yes.
So then that's a scale shift. It's like I think about things at a different scale.
And what was the other thing you spoke about? The bitter lesson. The bitter lesson.
Yeah, the bitter lesson is that like you think you can come up with something more clever than the machines. Ultimately, you throw more compute and you throw more data at it.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, right? Because people want that control, but then they don't. Like everyone's scared of like Skynet and Terminator, but it's not going to happen, right? It's like you have to use the AI in its own way. But yeah, what do you think?
I think that's like a pretty broad question. So if you focus on some areas, it's like, when it comes to say the economy, I still feel like it's largely going to be people doing business with people.
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, like if there's anything I've noticed about like influencers, they seem to be just paid for who they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not really you need to actually do anything arguably economically useful other than just being who you are.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is what I mean. Like it's about people doing business with people and people just willing to pay to another person just because they like them. And that's really the only reason that they need to pay them for something. But I think when it comes to the dangers of using, say, AI in warfare, I think that will exist.
Wow.
And I think one of the big challenges I'd presume the military is going to go for is like, how do they retain control over these AI systems? Because they want to retain control. I mean, they arguably try and retain a lot of control over their soldiers at the moment, right? Like how many militaries give their soldiers free reign to do things? Say they clearly have a lot of controls over just what people do. So I think similarly, they'll try and find some way of having controls over what machines will do.
I've not thought about it from that perspective of military as well. I'm enjoying this conversation, because we had Stefan on the podcast, and he is head of security at Coles, and he was telling me that like hackers actually work as hives and they work in communities and they're all like friends because they're trying to hack the same system. And I'd never thought about it in that way, but I'm not thought about AI and warfare in it as well. It's it's an interesting future we have, isn't it?
Yeah, so I know, some people. I had a colleague of mine that was, active in, trying to help stop, I guess, the use of AI in warfare. I think it'll be very challenging.
Yeah.
Just, the military industrial complex has a lot of interest in developing the technology and to try and get an edge. So I find it difficult to stop. I think if you get into a hot war with someone and the other party's using AI, how do you get an edge?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and what do you think of the future of technology then? Where do you think it's going? Because it's like, it's evolving at a quick pace, but obviously you've been very aware of this for a long time, and you're like, oh, it's kind of like told you so moment for you, isn't it? It's like,
yeah, well, I think we've just been, there's been this paper that came across my desk, which I found quite interesting. I think the institute was called MTER, and what they had done was they measured the kind of work that people did, how long it took, and then they measured the work that the AI or the machine could do. And then they charted it over the years. And I think when the first kind of like deep learning models came out, the kind of work that you would get it to do, let's just say, identify a hot dog or not, a human could do that in like, let's just say a second. And then now we got the machines to the point where they could also do the same task that took a second for a human to do. Then anyone that's working with ChatGPT, you could probably argue that is now doing the work that maybe takes somebody 5 minutes to do or 10 minutes to do. And what they noticed, I think if I remember the numbers correctly, that the machine is now able to complete these tasks. The length of these tasks is doubling every 7 months. Right. And so if you kind of extrapolate it out, I think they said something like, was it towards the end of this decade that we'll be able to complete tasks that I think that was 4 or 6 hours long. Right. And I think now you're starting to get into kind of like fairly, serious territory for like changing the nature of work. And I think that's why when I talk about, the enterprise perception system, like if you notice that this shift is happening, how do we design the system so that, what people do is now like managing this system. In some language, in some circles, that would be calling that, how do we manage all these different agents that might be working in my business?
Yeah. And you coined the term agent years ago as well, didn't you? You were like, we changed the language.
We did for our product. Yeah. Interestingly, we had been building, these AI pipelines. One of the things that we were struggling to try and articulate was how do we describe what the AI was doing and what people were doing? Because in Highlighter, we would have people and the AI working together. And we landed on the term agents to try and describe both the AI and people working together. You have two agents working on, say, the same task, collaborating on the same task. And we landed on agents because we had this view that in time, the agents would be more sophisticated in terms of its ability to carry out its tasks, right? In terms of a longer time frame. And so I guess the bet that we had made with Highlighter is that we're not going to build the most intelligent AI because we just don't have the resources to do so. Touching back on the earlier part of our conversation, going, who in Australia is going to build like a DeepSeek or a ChatGPT level LLM or AI? We just don't have seen the interest or the resources to do so. So what we embarked to do instead with Highlighter is just go, well, let's just assume someone's going to build that super smart AI that can do everything. Now imagine if you have that, how would you get them to work in your business? And what would that work environment need to look like? And we're thinking, well, that work environment needs to look like Highlighter because it's been designed with that fundamental assumption. And you have this super smart AI and you have some way of routing the information that's coming into your organization to these AI. That's what Highlighter's trying to do.
I'm very excited for the future and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And any imparting wisdoms, anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I think if you're starting out in this space, to just try and build something that interests you, because most industries are going to go through this shift. So it almost doesn't really matter what industry you want to choose, because almost every single one I think will be impacted by it. So really it's just a matter of getting started, picking, starting with the technology, finding some kind of problem or use case that interests you. And I'd imagine that you'll be able to deliver some, value in some way, whether it's to another company or a startup that you want to work in, or whether it's starting a new one yourself. Because almost every single industry is going to be impacted. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, it goes almost just like with computing has impacted almost every single industry. We're going to see a similar shift, I think, as we start to transition to what we call these enterprise perception systems. Yeah.
I'm very excited, and you heard it here first. So thank you very much for coming on the show, Jono. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.